In the heart of a remote wildlife sanctuary nestled among towering trees that whispered secrets of centuries past, a small kitten with a coat as soft as dusk wandered alone. The forest around her was dense with moss-covered rocks, thick vines that seemed to reach out, and the shadows of ancient trees that loomed like sentinels in the gloom. The air smelled of damp earth, pine, and something more elusive, an underlying musk that spoke of the untamed world. The kitten, named Luna by the only human who had raised her, had been raised in a small cabin on the edge of the sanctuary, a safe place, a retreat from the wilds that stretched out beyond the wooden walls. Luna had always felt a pull toward the wilderness, her instincts twitching whenever the winds changed and the forest called. She had grown curious about the deeper woods, the places that lay beyond the cabin where the humans never ventured. One cool autumn evening, when the sunlight filtered through the branches like molten gold, Luna slipped away. She found a small gap in the cabin's wooden fence and slipped into the forest, her small paws patting softly on the ground as she ventured deeper into the unknown. The first hour was serene, the sound of rustling leaves underfoot and the distant call of birds, her only companions. But as she wandered further, the forest began to change. The sunlight grew scarce, swallowed by the thick canopy above. Shadows stretched longer, and the air turned cooler, charged with an energy Luna couldn't quite explain. The familiar, comforting scent of home had faded, replaced by a mixture of wet earth and something far older, more primal. A shiver ran down Luna's spine, but curiosity kept her moving forward, past the thick trunks of trees that seemed to lean in toward her, their gnarled roots twisting like ancient hands reaching out to claim her. She paused occasionally to sniff the air, her fur prickling as if she could sense something else was there, something unseen. The deeper she traveled, the quieter it became. The birds stopped calling, and even the distant rush of a stream that usually sang through the sanctuary was eerily absent. Then she heard it, a sound that made her ears twitch and her heart race, a low, growling hum from somewhere deep within the forest. It wasn't the growl of a predator, but something different. It reverberated through her bones, sending a ripple of unease through her slender frame. Luna froze, her wide eyes scanning the dense undergrowth, but she saw nothing. The growling stopped as suddenly as it had begun, but the unease lingered. Luna hesitated, her instincts telling her to turn back. But her curiosity won. She pressed on, moving deeper, her small body navigating the thick underbrush with ease. She had no idea that with every step, she was moving closer to something far older than herself, something that lurked in the shadows of the sanctuary. As Luna reached a clearing, she saw something that made her stop in her tracks, the remnants of an old, abandoned treehouse. The wooden planks were rotting, and the ropes that had once held it steady now dangled loosely like decaying vines. But it wasn't the treehouse that held her attention. It was the soft, rhythmic sound coming from within. A sound that seemed almost... It was a heartbeat. Luna crept closer, drawn by the sound, but as she neared the treehouse, her foot slipped on a loose branch, and the noise stopped abruptly. She froze, her eyes wide, listening for any sign of movement. The forest had gone silent again, and the heartbeat was gone. But then, something moved in the corner of her vision. A shadow, long and slithering, crossed the clearing. Luna's fur stood on end as the hairs on the back of her neck prickled with fear. The shadow grew longer, curling around the base of the tree like a serpent, and Luna's instinct screamed at her to flee. But she didn't. She couldn't. The shadow solidified, and from within the treehouse, an enormous figure emerged. It was a creature of the forest, something she had never seen before, its shape fluid and shifting like smoke, its eyes glowing a pale, eerie blue. It had no legs, only a long, writhing mass that stretched into the ground. It was as if the forest itself had taken form. Luna backed away slowly, her heart racing in her chest. The creature moved closer, its presence almost suffocating. It exhaled in a low hiss, a sound that vibrated deep within Luna's chest, and she felt the ground beneath her tremble. It was then that she realized what this being was. It wasn't a physical creature at all. It was the essence of the forest itself. The heartbeat wasn't from an animal, it was the pulse of the earth. Suddenly, the trees around Luna began to shift. The roots seemed to grow, twisting and expanding, reaching for her like hands, their bark creaking in unnatural rhythms. The forest was alive in ways she couldn't comprehend, responding to the presence of the strange entity. Panic surged through her, and she sprinted, her legs carrying her faster than she ever thought possible, dodging the grasping roots and the strange, whispering wind that followed her every step. She didn't stop to look back, but the sound of movement, of branches cracking and the earth rumbling beneath her feet, told her that the forest was chasing her. As Luna reached the edge of the sanctuary, where the trees thinned and the open sky stretched out before her, she collapsed onto the familiar soil. The forest fell silent again, its eerie presence fading into the distance. Her fur was matted with sweat, her body trembling with exhaustion and fear. But as Luna looked back one last time, the edge of the sanctuary now felt like a boundary she had crossed, and she realized the forest had let her go. What Luna didn't know was that the forest had been watching her all along, and though she had escaped this time, it would never truly release her. The forest knew she was not meant to stay away. One day it would call her back, and next time it wouldn't be so easy to escape. The kitten's journey had just begun. Weeks passed since Luna's harrowing experience in the heart of the sanctuary, but the memory of that strange encounter lingered in her dreams. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the glowing blue eyes of the creature, the writhing mass of branches and roots, and the heartbeat that echoed deep within the earth. The quiet, the stillness of the edge of the sanctuary where she now lived, felt wrong. It was as though the forest had marked her, and though she tried to push it from her mind, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that she was being watched. Luna began to notice strange things. A shadow moving at the corner of her vision, a soft rustling in the underbrush when no wind blew, and sometimes, just sometimes, the distant echo of that haunting, low hum. The forest was closer than she had ever realized, and it seemed to be calling her back. On one particularly overcast afternoon, when the clouds hung heavy and the wind was still, Luna found herself drawn toward the same dense thicket where she had entered the wilderness weeks ago. Something about the air felt different, thicker, charged with anticipation. The earth beneath her paws seemed alive, pulsating like a heartbeat just beneath the surface. She hesitated at the edge of the forest, her fur standing on end as the scent of pine and moss mingled with something more ancient, more primal. Her instincts screamed at her to turn back, but that same curiosity, that same pull she had felt before, urged her onward. The deeper she went, the more the world around her seemed to shift. The trees began to close in tighter, their trunks growing larger, their limbs more twisted. The ground grew uneven, and every footstep felt more deliberate, as if she was being guided by invisible hands. A subtle hum vibrated in the air, resonating with her chest, and for a moment, Luna could almost feel the presence of something, or someone, watching from the shadows. She moved forward, her paws light and cautious, her eyes darting from side to side. The forest felt alive, watching her, reacting to her presence. The sounds of the woods, the chirping birds, the rustling leaves, had faded, replaced by the low, unsettling hum, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. It wasn't until she reached the clearing that she saw it again. The ancient tree house, But this time, something was different. The structure was more intact than before. The ropes, though frayed and aged, still clung tightly to the branches. The wood had a strange, ethereal glow to it, and as Luna approached, she could hear the faintest whisper, like voices on the wind. The moment she stepped into the clearing, the forest seemed to hold its breath. Then, without warning, the heartbeat returned. But this time, it wasn't distant. It was right beneath her paws, pulsing through the ground in rhythmic waves. She had no time to react before the ground beneath her shifted. The earth trembled violently, and the treehouse creaked, its ropes straining against something far stronger than they were meant to hold. Luna's heart raced as a massive shadow rose from the earth, its form taking shape out of the mist that suddenly poured from the base of the tree. The creature was here again, but this time it was different. Its form was more solid, more defined. It towered above Luna, its presence overwhelming. The mist that surrounded it whispered secrets of the forest, ancient and forgotten, carried by the wind as if the creature itself was the embodiment of the forest's deepest, darkest secrets. Luna felt the ground beneath her quiver as the creature's eyes, those glowing, pale blue orbs, focused on her. They seemed to see straight into her, deep into her soul. The heartbeat thudded in her chest, synchronized with the one that echoed through the forest. There was no escape this time. She could feel it. The forest had summoned her back, and this time it wasn't going to let her leave. She backed away, but the roots of the trees stretched out, twisting like serpents, blocking her every retreat. Her paws were tangled in the vines, her movements growing more frantic as the creature advanced. The mist enveloped her, swirling around her body like a suffocating fog, and the forest's whispers grew louder, drowning out the heartbeat. In the distance, Luna could hear the faint sound of rushing water, the stream that ran through the sanctuary, but it was too far. She was trapped. The creature loomed above her, its form undulating like smoke, its presence overwhelming. And then, with a sudden unearthly screech, it lunged. But Luna didn't scream. Her instincts kicked in. She had always been quick, small, and agile. She slipped free from the entangling roots, darting out of the way just as the creature struck. The mist exploded in a swirl of darkness, and Luna, using every ounce of speed in her small frame, darted between the creature's shifting limbs, leaping for the edge of the clearing. She didn't look back as she sprinted. The forest seemed to push her forward, her paws light on the ground as if the earth itself was helping her escape. The wind howled through the trees, a distant cry of something ancient and sorrowful. But Luna kept running, her heart pounding in her chest. By the time she reached the edge of the sanctuary, the creature's presence had receded into the forest's depths. The heartbeat faded, the mist disappeared. The eerie hum of the forest fell silent, leaving only the sound of her ragged breath in the still air. Luna collapsed onto the soft ground just beyond the tree line, her body trembling from the fear, from the exhaustion. Her fur was damp with sweat, her eyes wide with terror, but she had escaped. For now. The forest had not released her. It had only let her go this time, but she knew it was not over. The pull, that strange and insistent draw, would return. And next time, the forest would not be so merciful. Luna glanced back once more, the dense trees standing like silent sentinels, watching her. She didn't understand it, but she knew this. The forest had chosen her, and it would call again. And she would answer. The days that followed were filled with an unsettling stillness. The once familiar sanctuary now felt like a cage, the boundaries of safety closing in on her. Luna tried to return to her usual routines, chasing the occasional squirrel, stretching beneath the shade of familiar trees. But something inside her had shifted. The forest had changed her, and she could feel it deep in her bones. The humming never quite left her, not entirely. It was there in the wind, in the rustle of the leaves, in the occasional whisper that seemed to slip from the undergrowth. The trees seemed to watch her more intently now, their branches reaching toward her as though beckoning her back, urging her into the depths of the unknown. She avoided the forest's edges for as long as she could, but the pull, it was becoming impossible to resist. The forest was alive, and it was calling her. It happened again on the third night after her escape. The moon hung high, a pale crescent casting long shadows over the sanctuary. Luna had wandered near the outskirts of the wooded area, her instincts screaming at her to turn around, but she couldn't. She found herself once more at the edge of the thicket, where the trees stood tall and silent, their branches twisting into strange shapes like hands reaching toward her. A cool mist began to creep over the ground, swirling at her paws, and the air grew thick, heavy with anticipation. And then it was as if time itself bent. A deep rumble filled the air, the earth shaking beneath her as it had before, the heartbeat once again reverberating through the forest floor, calling to her. It was as though the earth itself was speaking, telling her that it was ready for her. Luna's pulse quickened. She wanted to run. Her body tensed, her instincts shouting for her to flee. But this time she wasn't sure she could. She wasn't sure she even wanted to. The mist parted in front of her like a veil, revealing the heart of the forest. The ancient treehouse stood before her again, though it had changed. The structure was no longer just a curious relic. It was alive, a living part of the forest, the twisted wood now pulsating with the same rhythm as the heartbeat beneath the earth. The ropes that had once seemed frayed were now taut, glowing faintly with an eerie light. Luna stood there, frozen in place, caught between fear and fascination. She knew she had to go closer. There was no avoiding it now. The moment she took a step forward, the ground shuddered beneath her, and the massive creature from before emerged from the shadows. But this time, it didn't rise from the earth. It was already there, standing in the clearing. It was larger, its form more solid, its tendrils of mist swirling around its body like storm clouds. It did not approach her this time. Instead, it simply stood there, watching, waiting. Luna's heart pounded in her chest, the rhythm matching the thrum of the earth beneath her paws. She felt the weight of the forest pressing in on her, every living thing around her attuned to her presence. The mist coiled around her legs, a soft, whispering breath that wrapped itself around her, urging her forward. There was no choice now. With one last glance at the creature, Luna stepped toward the treehouse, her body trembling. The closer she got, the stronger the pulse of energy grew, wrapping around her like an invisible force, guiding her to the very heart of the forest. She climbed the ancient rope ladder, her claws gripping the weathered wood, the vibrations of the forest echoing through her limbs with each step. As she reached the top, a strange calm descended upon her. The wind no longer howled, the leaves no longer rustled. Everything was still. The only sound was the heartbeat. It was inside her now. At the top of the treehouse, Luna looked around. The entire forest spread out before her, the ancient trees stretching far beyond her sight. And there, at the center of it all, was the source, the heart of the forest. A massive, gnarled tree whose roots seemed to stretch down into the earth, into the very core of the world. The tree pulsed with the same rhythm that had drawn her here, its branches weaving in patterns that seemed both random and purposeful, like the threads of a vast cosmic web. Luna approached the tree, her fur bristling with an energy she had never felt before. She was standing at the nexus of it all, the very heart of the forest, the pulse of life and death, of creation and decay. And then, as if the forest itself had been holding its breath, The creature advanced. It moved toward her slowly, its massive form undulating like smoke, its glowing eyes never leaving hers. The roots of the tree beneath Luna's paws seemed to reach up toward her, connecting her to the ground below.